to talk about the original all-terrain vehicle, which would be the Caspian horse and harness. I'm Dick Kearley. We're here in the church barn in Florida, and I've been around horses all my life, but they weren't really important to me until fairly recently. I grew up in southern Vermont, and I was only 3 miles away from the Morgan horse farm. Anna Ela was raising Morgans there. So there were a lot of Morgans around, and that was kind of what I thought of as a horse. And eventually I came down to Florida to go to school here at the university, and I was training in neurosciences, and we used animal models in the laboratory, mostly rats, but I got a lot of training in schedules of reinforcement, how do we train animals. And then I trained dogs. After graduate school, I trained dogs for a while. And then I got my younger daughter, got a strong interest in horses. She decided and announced to the world that she was born to ride. And I realized that horses didn't work quite the same as rats and dogs. Their mentality is completely different. They don't have the same reward system. They're really special in how they work with humans. So one way or another, I got my first Caspian horses, I think in 2002, and I quickly figured out that they were, even in the horse world, they're special. They're different and they're special. So that's how I get to be here today. My friend, Bob Giles, has a far more extensive history with horses, starting in Maine. You want to tell us about skidding logs in Maine, Bob?
Yep, Bob Giles. So I grew up in the foster program. Down East Maine, I went through 13 foster homes growing up. But the thing of it is that down East Maine was very poor. So nobody could afford tractors, so everybody had a draft horse. So I always had a friend waiting for me at every new farm I went to. So the places I have put a horse to get a stick of wood from a tree trunk to the side of the road, over rocks and stumps and swamps and cliffs, give me the experience I needed and the love and respect for the animal. So I drove my first horse in 1955. So my very first horse I drove was on a hay rake. I hit a hornet's rest and we had a runaway. So it threw me off. The horse ran into the woods. So we went and got it. It broke the shaft on the hay rake. We cut a sapling, repaired that, took our shoe strings off and repaired the harness, put me back in the seat, and I've been there ever since. So after high school, I went to Vietnam, all-expatriate trip, and I got wounded 3 times over there in a little place called Quezon in Tet Offensive of '68. So the one thing about growing up in foster homes is, number one, an anger issue. And so I realized that the only saving grace I had to get out of the system was, number one, education. Number two, the horse was my relief, that I could talk to them. They was always happy to see me. They always ate what I put in front of them, and they would gladly give me their life just by asking. So, like I said, after high school, I realized I had an anger problem. So I joined the Marines. So there's 79 other men that have an anger problem. So after Vietnam and being wounded 3 times, the anger problem was still there. So I became a police officer for 20 years. And I went to the University of Maine for life sciences and agriculture, and come to Florida, started my own training center, and that is how Dick and I met. And he introduced me to the Caspian horses. So my background, I wanted to be the best horseman that ever come out of Maine. So I trained with Larry Poulin, 7-time national champion on a single horse. I trained with Bill Lauer, 7-time national champion with pairs and 4-in-hand. Huey Littlefield from Maine, national champion many times for 6, and Lloyd Langell out of Nova Scotia for the 8. So I had quite an intensive background with horses, but Caspians, the first time I met them with Dick, I was very impressed with their work ethics, and I was very impressed with their temperament. They would gladly do anything they asked, and we sent them to the extreme in some of the experiments we did. And they never once took advantage of the fact that at any time they could have run away, and they never did. So Dick and I had a great many demos and exhibitions, and the crowd never failed to be enthusiastic and overjoyed at seeing them. So my background is driving 8-horse hitches. So your lead horse, you're 60 feet long, you have 480 feet of reins in your hand, and 8-ton on your fingertips. So you don't really drive, you just suggest, I'd really like to go this way. No, but
it's almost like mental telepathy. When that lead horse is out there, he's out of reach.
Right.
And yet, I swear, with my horse Onyx, I could wiggle my little finger, and he would do what I wanted him to do.
So I try to drive 90% voice command, 10% reins. So you got to remember, an ounce on your finger is a pound in the horse's mouth. If you move your hand 1 inch, you move your horse 1 foot. So the more horses you put out there, the less amount of pressure you have to apply to be able to turn them. So it's all finesse, and it's all, and the biggest asset that you can have if you want to drive is, number 1 is kindness, and number 2 is empathy. Those are the, but you have to be, you have to pay attention to details. So you can imagine, drive 1 horse, but if you want to drive 4 like Dick and I, that is not 4 times as much work, it's 8 times as much work.
I remember the first time when we had kind of made the decision, and by the way, Bob is a great coach because he pushes the envelope. He says, oh, well, you're driving a pair and you're doing great. Well, why don't we put some more together and we'll make a 4-in-hand, you know? And I had no idea how to drive a 4-in-hand. And I think we went over to some lady had some minis. She had a 4-horse hitch of minis. And you put me out in her pasture.
Right?
Well, I'll tell you, I struggled to make it back across that pasture. I was like, this is like trying to drive a snake. Anyway, but I remember another thing that you said, going back to Bill Lauer and those other fellows, you know, you said that you would never take a lesson from somebody that didn't beat you in competition.
That's right.
You are a fierce competitor, which we can get a lot of pleasure out of our horses without competing. But some people like to have a goal and a whatever. In my case, my goal is simply to go out and come back in one piece. but nonetheless, we challenge in many ways. I did all the things that competition would require, but I didn't do them in competition. I just did them for the fun of it.
Yes.
And we had a lot of fun.
So
your segue into the next little bit of my outline here was we were talking about if you want to drive horses, you can't do it without a vehicle.
Right. But the other thing, you should also explain, so we had the demo we did with the chasing the 4-wheeler, but how did you happen to come up with that scenario?
We went to a rare breeds weekend at the Kentucky Horse Park, a special weekend for rare breeds, and I don't know, there was maybe half a dozen of us there with Caspian horses, and we were invited to go up to the breed barn and show those rare breed. Well, the other people would have something like, well, you know, you have a Frisian and you got somebody with like a knight in armor suit on them, and you know, it was pretty entertaining to the crowd. So anyway, talking to Ken, who does lots of clinics and seminars and so forth, I just said, what can we do? And he said, well, you've told me that the original use, or the last known use of the Caspian was hunting lions on a chariot. Maybe you could do a chariot race. I said, well, Tommy Turvey does a great chariot race act. I said, it's just me. I don't have anybody to race against. But maybe we could do a lion hunt. So what we do?
So we put a gentleman in a lion suit on a 4-wheeler, and then we chased him with you made me the
Persian garb,
right,
a gown and a beard.
And we would chase the 4-wheeler with 4-in-hand, and I had the spear, and at the end of it, I would kill the lion, and I would take the spear, and he would catch it between his arm and his rib cage. So we never failed. And we would put 15-foot rooster tails in the...
Bob and the Caspians just love to throw dirt.
Yeah.
So anyhow, as we go along here, we're assuming that you wouldn't even bother to watch this video if you weren't interested in driving horses.
Right.
So, you can't drive a horse without a vehicle.
Yep.
Any kind of carriage or buggy or whatever, we refer to it as a vehicle. So you got some choices, and I started with an easy entry. Fortunately, I went to a good vendor who knew what I was up to, and I had a good easy entry. But there's even a good easy entry leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, you got to remember, if you're driving in a two-wheel vehicle, you're either putting pressure on the horse's back or you're putting pressure on the horse's diaphragm. So the worst load that a horse can carry is a human being. Because if you go into a hole, you're going forward. That's tremendous pressure on the back of the horse. When you come out of the hole, you fall back, and that's putting pressure on the diaphragm, taking their wind away. So I always recommend people get a four-wheel carriage. So that all the horse has to worry about is draft, pulling the load. In a two-wheel carriage, if you lean to the side, either way, then now the horse has to compensate because now the load is not directly behind him. So now you're pushing the horse off balance, and it takes him a moment to readjust to where your weight is. So he has to follow your weight wherever you put it in the carriage. Where if you have a four-wheel carriage such as this, he doesn't have to worry about it. Okay, he can just do his business, and he has no restriction on his body except to pull the weight.
So the other thing that I'm a big chicken. I don't like having that horse's butt right in my face. If I'm on an easy entry, that horse's butt is only a couple of feet away from me.
That's right.
And I've had people try to tell me that a horse can't kick higher than 4 feet. That's crazy. Go watch a rodeo one day.
Yes.
I don't like to smell horse's hoof in my face.
Right. Exactly right.
So we would hope that we could get away from the easy entry car. Takes us to another interesting point, which I'm going to get a little off my outline here, but you said the horse backed her into a corner.
That's right.
Okay? We want horses to go forward. I think we've said this once or twice already here, but we want to be forward motion, forward.
Always.
As an advanced step, we may ask the horse to back up.
Right.
But initially, it's forward, forward, forward.
Yep.
We don't want it backing into our vehicle.
Right.
The other thing is that the marathon vehicles have brakes,
Right.
which the easy entry has no brakes. So if you're going downhill, it tends to want to roll up onto the horse.
That's right.
So the next element that you got to have that has to work is you got a vehicle, now you got to have a harness.
That's right. So another little just trivia fact. So an upper level riding horse, upper level dressage horse, can do 21 movements. When you attach a horse to a carriage, you restrict those movements to 11.
That's a little factoid I never heard you tell me before. Okay, what do you think about leather harness versus?
Okay, so there's two different types of harnesses. One is the breastplate harness, which is basically what we use here in Florida for two reasons. Number one, the breastplate harness allows the horse to move around inside of the harness. Plus it disperses heat. When you put a collar on a horse, what you do, so on the breastplate harness, you have a 3-inch breastplate. All the weight of that load is generated inside of that breastplate. So there is hundreds of pounds per square inch for that 3 inches to be able to pull the load. So it's like a vise. The draft, the weight of the load, your terrain, if you're going uphill, that acts as a vise and it squeezes. So if you have a collar, let's say a big draft horse takes a 3-foot collar. So that's 36 inches on either side that you're distributing the weight of the load. So you only have a few pounds every square inch. But so you got to make up your mind, what are you going to do with this horse? Are you going to be pulling a load with it, or is it going to just be going down the trail? So that will determine what kind of harness that you get, whether you got one with the collar or whether you get one with the breastplate.
What about biothane versus nylon?
Okay,
People tend to stumble into a nylon harness as a first, because they're cheap, right?
Yep. So the nylon has an abrasive factor to it, and it has no give. but it will last a lot longer. The leather harness, you constantly have to be working that. You have to oil that once a month anyhow, you should be. The bio harness, I've had your bio harness, how many years old is that now?
We're almost 20, close to 20 years old.
And it's still just as good as the day that you bought it.
Just dump it in a bucket with Dawn
And
dish
ju-
soap and wash it.
Yep, just wash it with a hose. So, if you want to spend your time polishing harness, by all means, buy a leather harness. Okay, but if you want to enjoy your horse and enjoy driving instead of sitting in a chair, rubbing oil into your harness, then I highly recommend the bio harness.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, what about the bridle? We
So
get
the
people,
bridle-
people saying that, oh, I don't see why you put blinkers on the horse. We ride a horse with no blinkers.
Yep. But you got to remember, when you're riding a horse with no blinkers, they haven't got anything chasing them either. So when the horse is an animal of flight, they was never meant to stop and do a fight. I mean, if you get them cornered, of course the heels are going to be coming at you. But for the most part, they want to run away from their peers. So we attach a nightmare to their bottom and ask them to be happy about it. And that's where empathy comes in. You know, that we've asked them, they're meant to go and roam. They was never meant
Right.
to,
Right.
you know.
And they're so aware of threats from,
Right.
they got almost 360-degree vision.
Right.
And what are they doing with that vision? They're not looking for the next blade of grass, they're looking for predators, right? So we're gonna shut down some of that possible predator input.
And that's where the kindness comes in, because it's only their love for us and their trust for us that when a dog comes out to chase them or something spooks them, that they don't run away. That they say, okay, we trust you that you're going to keep us safe. And every time I pick up the reins, I close my eyes and I make the mental connection. I will keep you safe. So an old Budweiser driver told me one time, you always know when you pick up the reins and there's a little bit of magic. And if it isn't there, go buy a boat, play golf.
Yeah. So the choice, we're talking about the harness and the other essential pieces of equipment. The bit is pretty interesting. We're not going to drive bitless,
Right,
and we're not going to drive in a snaffle that's hinged in the middle.
right, because that's just like the breastplate. The more you pull, the more that pinches. So the horse is going to try to get away from the pain, and that means backwards. So when you're always trying to encourage forward motion. But the other thing you have to remember is the Caspian has a relatively small tongue.
Yep.
It's got a bony tongue. But if you have a halflinger, you have a gypsy, you have a pewid, they have a thick, like a draft horse tongue. So then you need a mullen mouth that gives relief to the tongue.
We can get relief if the horse doesn't particularly like the bit. We did this with Champ here. We wrapped the bit with
Latex.
With latex.
Exactly.
Brand name that we used was Sealtex. It's an old product. Racehorse people have been using it forever.
Right.
The next thing that was on my mind about the bit is that we can have bits that have some degree of lever action.
Right.
They have multiple rings or slots
Yes.
in the bit.
Yep.
And Bob taught me real early on that the bottom ring is called the duffer's ring.
That's right.
And if somebody's driving and they got their reins in the bottom ring, you probably don't want to ride with them.
That's exactly right.
We end up we're on the quote unquote the dead ring. I call it the dead ring. It has no lever action at all.
Exactly. So my own horse, I like a plastic bit because it does have some give to it, and it's easy on the horse's mouth. And the gum factor, you know, that steel is laying right on the horse's gums, and that I wouldn't want a piece of steel in my mouth for an hour calling it a good time.
Right.
Yep.
So it's again, you want the lightest contact that you can get.
Right. Exactly.
You train for the lightest contact you can get. And
Yep.
you know, we hear that in the dressage horses a lot. You know, can we get this horse to do this movement, and the observer doesn't even see the rider cueing it. When we're talking about the harness and the equipment, we also have the whip.
Right.
You know, unfortunately, in this day and age, we have some negative connotations to a whip.
Yep.
We really don't intend to hurt the horse with it. But I'll tell you what, if I had a horse backing me into a corner and I had a whip, he would know I had a whip. Because we want that horse going forward, we don't want him coming back on us.
So you gotta remember, you never want the horse to be afraid of the whip. The whip is his friend that's helping him do the job. So we apply the whip to the back of the horse for the accelerator. We use the whip to turn the horse by applying it to its side. So the end of the whip should be able to touch the front shoulder of the horse. However, you got to train the horse. So depending on whether you want to go left or right, the horse is going to be able to see that whip above the blinker. So that's something you have to train for. It isn't something that because they're going to try to duck away from it. So but again, and when you're using the whip, you don't want to strike them so it hurts them, but you want to let them know that you just told them to do something. So the whip is so important. And the whip is held so it goes from your hip to the shoulder. And when you're using it, it's only the wrist that moves. You never give up the pressure that's in the horse's mouth, because now the horse is going to go looking for the bit. So it's always the wrist that you use to apply. And enough pressure so he knows you told him to do something, but not enough strike that you hurt him. Okay, another factor if you're thinking about getting a driving horse, number one thing is a nice, soft brown eye. So the other thing you want to be looking for, so to make sure that the horse does not know how to use his body the most efficiently. So it's our job to help him to do his job. So what you're looking for is a hind foot to step into the front hoof print or beyond it. So that means they're engaged in the rear end. So the horse is divided into 3 equal parts. The hind end is the engine, the rib cage to the front shoulder is a radiator, and the head is a steering wheel. So you want them engaged in that rear end. And if he is engaged in the rear end, then he is using his body the most efficiently that he can. So that's just something to look for when you're going to buy. And if you're going to go buy a horse, whether it's a Caspian or whatever, take a knowledgeable person with you. Because it's not the questions you ask, it's the questions you don't ask that can get you in trouble.
Incidentally, along the way here, we're getting to the next essential ingredient that's needed, and that's knowledge. We've already covered a lot of knowledge. You can see it here in Bob. If you're going to drive a horse, you need some knowledge.
Right.
I was extremely fortunate. God looks out for little children and idiots. that I was able to meet and work with Bob Giles. But if you were in Timbuktu, and how would you start out to find a trainer?
Well, and that's the important thing. You might think you're doing everything correctly, but unless you got somebody on the ground watching you, and picking up the details of adjustment and everything, you can get in trouble in a split second. Like you just got through saying the holdbacks weren't on that carriage.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a detail that I would have noticed immediately.
Right.
And so another little thing, like we have the elastic girths so that the horse can breathe, that we don't restrict him. We ask them to do a lot for us in expanding their lung capacity. And so we need to give that horse room to breathe.
So I don't know that necessarily the top competitor is going to be the coach that you want, but the coach or the trainer has got to have real world experience. I don't think you can learn this by looking at YouTube videos.
No, I don't think so, or reading a book. But
I've read all the books.
Yeah, I've read
them all. I got a whole shelf full of them, but you got to have a person, and the person has to have the best interest of the horse at heart. They're not just there to make a $100 training fee. They're there to really, truly help you and the horse. Basically, to stay safe. Job one is keep it safe.
Exactly.
All right. So when you start a horse, most people do some ground driving. I think everybody has to do some ground driving. But I feel like you are pretty quick to go to the carriage.
Well, yes, but what do we always do first?
We're looking for a Lexi horse to put
That's
next to it.
exactly right.
We're looking for a schoolmaster.
Nothing can train a horse like another horse.
Yeah.
Something's going wrong, that horse only has to look sideways. Well, he's pretty calm. What am I so excited about?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Which is why, as soon as I got to drive multiples, I didn't even like to drive a single anymore.
Right.
There's, from the skill of the driving, there's nothing to driving a single.
Right.
Right? But I definitely believe that one horse can settle the other horse. At least you got a 50-50 chance that they're not both going to go off at the same time.
Yep. Well, that brings up another interesting point. So I was president of all the carriage drivers in Florida. 1 year alone, I had 4 ladies over 70 years old that I visited in the emergency room. And all of them, because of their ego, and they had been driving, they had 30 years experience, took on outlaw ponies that people told them, don't do that. And they all ended up in the hospital because of their ego. Well, you gotta remember, when you're over 70, you have the reflexes of a throw rug and the courage of a toothless police dog. You know? So, you know, don't let your ego fool you. The other thing that happens, people buy color. I've always wanted a Palomino. I've always wanted a Pinot. I always, you know, buy the horse that's going to keep you safe and give you enjoyment going down the trail. Don't buy color.
And we brag a lot on our Caspian horses, on their
you
temperament
should.
and their work ethic.
Right.
However, I was reviewing this in my mind before doing this presentation. I think we probably had more than 20 horses, Caspian horses here, one way or
Right.
another, and we hitched most of them. But
Yep.
there were, I recall 3 that we did not, and one of them just pitched a fit. The first time I ever tried it, just completely pitched a fit, and it was just like, I don't think this horse is cut out for driving.
That's
and,
right.
And I think it can happen in any breed.
Exactly.
I think, and you've related some draft. You would think every draft ought to be drivable, right?
Yeah.
And that'll take us back also to a bit where I mentioned the Morgans. I think
Yeah.
early Morgans, the Lippet Morgans, probably all of them had a work ethic that would carry you through whatever.
Right.
But they have been tinkered with genetically by humans since
Yeah.
in our lifetime. And the Caspian has not been fiddled about with. Nobody's breeding a little something else or doing a little something else with the Caspian. They are what they are.
But you got to remember, so the quarter horse, the Arabian, the Morgan, they was meant to be 14-2. Now, we got 17 hands. Morgans in all breeds.
Yeah.
The Gypsy Banner, we brought it to this country. It's been in this country, let's say 20 years. In 20 years, we have grown it, so now we have all 60-inch Gypsy Banners. We want everything bigger. The Caspian is the only breed I know that has stayed at the same level. But the feed program here in America, we can take an ounce of blood and we know exactly what that horse needs. He's low on magnesium, or whatever. And we can change the genetics. You know, we can make that horse so much bigger, which everybody wants. You know, and it's a shame because the quarter horse was supposed to be 14-2.
Right.
What is it now?
Whatever you want.
Whatever you want. That's exactly because of the feed program and our ability to change that.
Right.
Yep.
So
And
the
I'm so glad that
the Caspian is something of a genetic miracle that it's thousands of years and it's still the same horse.
Right, exactly.
And it is what it is. Don't fiddle with it, please.
That's exactly right. Yep.
That pretty much wraps up my outline here of what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. It's a great conversation. I love
Yeah.
it. I love it.
Yeah.
But we only gave you the most basic overview. We could spend an hour on any one of these subjects that we've touched on today. Again, the driving is probably I won't say it's the best application for Caspian, but it's the easiest because they're too little for us adults to ride, and it's the adults that are going to get it done.
So our little fella right here, so how many times did we hitch before you was comfortable? 4 times?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was how old when you broke him?
20.
20. And 4 times you went around the ring and then I got this.
Right.
I'm happy to do it.
So he's a good Caspian.
He's a great
I'm just saying
Caspian.
that
Yeah.
there's no guarantees. It's a horse.
No.
It's a horse, and I
No.
don't care really what breed it is. You
Yeah.
could pick one that's going to just kick your carriage to pieces.
Yep. But usually the eye of the horse will tell you what's going on inside.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to us.
Yes, and I hope you buy a Caspian. I've always been very proud to have them in front of me and honored that they did what I asked.